People a couple of minutes. That robot lady always makes me jump. If anyone would like to change it now, I'll give you like a minute or so. Amazing. Okay, I'm going to just start introducing while people do some admin things. So welcome to our Teach Out. This is the second in our series. We've put one on last week, which was about climate change and forced displacement. So that recording will also be up on the website if you'd like to see it. And I think on the 4th of August, we're doing one about the Nationality and Borders Bill. So if anyone would like to check that out, it'll also be on the website. We're hosting this Teach Out to celebrate 10-year anniversary of Bristol being launched as a city of sanctuary. So we wanted to extend the conversation and keep discussing issues that affect people seeking sanctuary in the city of Bristol. So we're joined by Forward and Caroline today, so thank you guys so much for coming. And the structure of the session is going to be, we're going to hear from Caroline and then hear about Forward just about their own work and a bit about their organisations. And then we're going to go through a few questions that have been pre-prepared. If anyone would like to submit a question, you're welcome to message it either to Anna or just pop it in the chat and we'll ask that as we go. But if you guys are ready, Caroline, I'll hand over to you if you'd like to talk about BRR and your own work.
Yeah, so hi everybody. My name's Caroline and I work for Bristol Refugee Rights. I'm actually not going to go into loads of detail about who Bristol Refugee Rights are, so if people want to know more about that, check out our website, it's Bristol Refugee Rights. But since February 2021, I've been working in Bristol Refugee Rights, trying to listen to the experiences of people who've been subject to no recourse to public funds, actually working in partnership with RAMP, which Forward is also involved with, so he might talk a bit more about their side of that in a bit. So I've been talking to people about what their experiences have been of having no recourse to public funds, but also what would make the biggest difference to them if things were to change, like what would be the biggest impact for them. We did hope that some of them might come and speak directly today, but for reasons that you can probably understand, people felt a bit nervous to come and speak directly, and a lot of people wanted to remain anonymous. But I'm going to share one, maybe two, depending how long I talk for, people's stories that were shared with me. So just before I start with somebody's story, just wanted to say that NRPF affects a huge range of people in Bristol. It affects asylum seekers, but it also affects EU nationals, people here with a visa, working on a visa that has a condition which says they're no recourse to public funds, student visas, family visas. So, for example, families often who've come through the refugee reunion route, and undocumented people, so people who've got no current visa or no current status with the Home Office. So it's a hugely diverse group of people, some of whom can work, some of whom can't work. But for the purpose of this, the stories I'm going to share are both people that have been at some point asylum seekers. I'm sure one of the other speakers will talk a bit more. All asylum seekers are technically no recourse to public funds, as in they can't access universal credit or housing benefit like most people in the UK can. But there is a specific system, an asylum support system for asylum seekers, which allows them to access housing and a very small amount of money, a very insubstantial amount of money, but it's something. So actually for my project, I haven't been speaking with asylum seekers. I've only been speaking with people who've got no ability to access anything, so who aren't eligible for the asylum support process. So that might be people who've been refused and have fallen out of the asylum system, or people who didn't realise that the asylum system existed for many, many years and then applied later on. I'm going to stop talking now and just start speaking in the words of one of these people. So I'm just going to start with Mo's story. So this is Mo. Mo left his country of origin in 2011. Mo's gay, but life in his country of origin made it impossible to live as a gay man. He arrived in Bristol on a student visa to study English. But after experiencing what life could be like for gay people here in the UK, Mo could not return home. Mo spent the next 6 to 7 years hiding is his words. He never spoke with a solicitor, had no idea that there was an asylum system or that you could apply for asylum. He was very afraid of being caught by immigration officials and returned to his country of origin. So he lived a sort of underground life here in the UK, here in Bristol, in a small bit of Bristol, just Easton, St Paul's, Eastville Park, the city centre. That was his whole world. He moved around all the time, sleeping one night here at one community member's house and another night there. But many nights he also spent sleeping outside in Bristol's parks. Sometimes he would do chores to get somewhere to sleep in someone's house. But he still wasn't honest about his sexuality. He kept it a secret from all of the community members that he was staying with because he was worried about how they would respond. Sometimes takeaways in the area would give him free food. But as time went on, this got more and more difficult because he was often sleeping in the park. He knew he was starting to look dirty and he was very unwell. He could feel that other members of the community were starting to judge him. And he started to get to know other homeless people in Bristol. And to manage his situation, he started using drugs and alcohol. He was often ill. In the British winters, sleeping outside in the cold and the rain, he could not look after his health at all. This is a quote in his words: "This time was unbelievable. You can't imagine it for someone else." In 2017, Mo was at a friend's house when it was raided and he was arrested by the immigration enforcement team. It was only at this point that he learned about Bristol Refugee Rights and other organisations that support people in Bristol. Bristol Refugee Rights were able to help Mo to get a solicitor, and he explained his story to his solicitor, who said, well, you would be eligible for claiming asylum because of being LGBT. He also joined Bristol's Pride Without Borders group, which is run by Bristol Refugee Rights, a group for LGBT asylum seekers and refugees in Bristol. So for the first time ever in a community group, he was being honest about his sexuality and able to be who he is. He came every week to BRR's drop-in for lunch, helped out there, got to know all the staff and volunteers. And for the very first time, he was also supported to get help with his mental health. In his words, "My life fully changed." After submitting an asylum claim, Mo was eligible for asylum support. So he'd moved from having no way of getting any support from the government to being able to access asylum support. And the Home Office offered him accommodation in London, but Mo refused. Bristol was the only place he knew. It was his safe place and his home, and he wasn't willing to leave. Mo says, in Easton, in the community, if you need help, you can just go on the street and ask someone and they will help. Mo's first asylum application was rejected by the Home Office and he appealed through the courts but was refused again. Mo's solicitor, however, felt that he did have a strong case and these decisions were wrong, so that they supported him to put in a fresh claim. But his fresh claim was rejected again. Every time he went through the asylum system, Mo had to tell his story again and again to the immigration officials. That was really hard. But worse than telling the story was waiting for the decisions. After each application, months and months and months would pass where Mo heard nothing and was waiting to hear about whether or not he was going to be able to stay in the UK. After his fresh claim, Mo was again able to appeal his decision and go to court. This time, Mo had lots of support in the court. Lots of volunteers and other members from Pride Without Borders attended court with Mo to be witnesses to talk about what they knew about Mo's history and his sexuality. So after being in the UK with no recourse to public funds for 10 years, Mo was granted refugee status in 2021. Mo says, it felt very amazing after going through the stressful asylum system. So Mo's now working to establish his life in Bristol and trying to move on with his future. But he can still feel the impact of those 10 years living on the streets and moving around. Mo says, I can feel the difference. My brain is not as sharp as it was. I know that in that time I have damaged myself. So I asked Mo, looking back over the last 10 years, in Bristol, what would have helped you the most? What do you want people to know about the support you needed? And he said the number one most important thing is giving people shelter and meeting their basic needs. Without somewhere to sleep and access to food, Mo says it's impossible for people to make progress with their lives. That's the foundation for everything, especially, Mo says, in the UK, where the weather is so cold. Shelter is key. And then the second thing that's so important for Mo was access to legal advice to apply for papers and knowing where you could go to get this. If Mo had known in 2011 that these things existed, he wouldn't have spent those 7 years living on the streets that have had this huge impact on his life. So that's Mo's story. Freya, I'm wondering about time. Do you want me to do another one or just one? Yeah, okay. That was Mo. And then the second person's story that I'd like to share is Dana's story. So Dana arrived in the UK. He came to the UK to claim asylum. And he claimed as soon as he arrived or very close to when he was found, and was straight away housed by the asylum support system in Liverpool. When he was in Liverpool, he got to know some members of the Kurdish community there, but they then moved to Bristol. Dana's initial asylum claim was also refused. Dana was able to appeal, but he couldn't find a solicitor who would represent him in court. So he attended his court session completely alone without a solicitor, and he was refused again. At this point, his asylum support accommodation and money from the Home Office was stopped. With no accommodation and no money, Dana remembered the community who had met, who'd moved to Bristol, and thought, I'm going to follow them. I'm going to go to Bristol because I know some people there that will help me. When he arrived here in Bristol, Dana was homeless. He slept in a small tent in Eastfield Park. His mental and physical health were very poor. He felt frustrated and upset. He struggled to access the medical care that he needed. After a little bit of time, he was able to reconnect with some of the community members that he'd met in Liverpool, and they helped him a bit. Sometimes they'd let him stay on their sofa, or they'd give him some money so he could buy food. Sometimes a Kurdish restaurant would let him eat there for free. He says the community were truly kind, but even with this limited support, life was really hard. He was constantly moving around, never sure where he could sleep or what support would be available. Dana says now, thankfully, I have managed to get past that difficult time. In 2020, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the British government enacted a policy called Everyone In, which funded local authorities to temporarily house anyone who was homeless. This recognised that being homeless was a public health risk, as it was not possible for people to self-isolate to protect themselves or others from COVID-19. This policy applied to everyone, no matter whether they were subject to no recourse to public funds. So for the first time, individuals in Bristol who were subject to no recourse to public funds could access help through Bristol City Council. And Dana was housed by the council in a hotel in Bristol. Dana says, it was incomparable to where I was before. While in the hotel, Dana started receiving £10 a week destitution support from a local charity, Borderlands, and he also was provided with food through the hotel, although this food was often stuff that Dana didn't normally eat and didn't really recognise, so sometimes that was a bit difficult for him. Dana says he saw a 100% improvement in his health once he was in the hotel. But in the winter of 2021, Dana was told that the Everyone In accommodation was going to end as the government restrictions eased around COVID-19. Understandably, this made Dana feel very stressed and worried. While he was being supported in the hotel, however, he'd been put in touch with Bristol Hospitality Network, a local charity who provide hosted accommodation for individuals in Dana's situation, while they work to regularise their status to put papers into the Home Office. So as Everyone In ended, Dana had been given temporary accommodation in a BHN house and started receiving a £20 per week allowance from them. This means Dana will not have to face homelessness in Bristol again. Dana says, When I heard that everyone in accommodation wouldn't be extended, it was stressful. I was worried, but at least for now, I get £20 weekly income from BHN and I have temporary accommodation from BHN too, which is great. Just before being housed in the hotel, Dana had been referred to Bristol Refugee Rights by the Kurdish community in Bristol. We'd helped him to find a solicitor who was working with Dana to submit a fresh asylum claim. It took Dana and his solicitor over a year of working together to gather all the evidence needed for this fresh claim. They spent a long time waiting for the Home Office to release Dana's previous records to the solicitor, and COVID delays also made it more difficult to gather the evidence they needed. But in winter 2021, they finally submitted the fresh claim. This means Dana is now also eligible for accommodation and subsistence payments from asylum support. So Dana is currently working with BRR to apply for asylum support, but until it's granted, Dana can keep staying in his safe place with BHM. So looking back on his experiences in Bristol of being subject to no recourse to public funds, Dana says the biggest things for him are accommodation. In his words, I was desperate for a place to live. And then secondly, restoring contact with the Home Office. Dana did say he tried to contact the Home Office himself independently while he was sleeping in the park, but the system was too confusing, too complicated, and he wasn't able to do anything. So it was only once he was able to access advice that he's been able to get into proper contact with the Home Office again. So they are the stories of Dana and Mo, who live here still in Bristol and call Bristol their homes.
Thank you so much, Caroline. We appreciate you sharing those stories so much, and thank you to the people that supplied them. I think we'll move on to Forward now. If you wanted to say a bit about your own work and maybe something to the City Council, and then we'll move on to the questions.
Thank you, Freya. What extraordinary stories that we have had there, Caroline. That's really beautiful. And for me, what made me so excited about the stories that you shared is, Mo's story today on the 10th anniversary of City of Sanctuary. What it actually means for Bristol. It's actually a testament to some of the great work that is being done across the city. Forward Maisokwadzo, the Mayor's advisor on Mayor's inclusion advisor on migration issues across the council. But specifically on no recourse to public funds, as already mentioned by Caroline, our work began really after the everyday, everyone in, where we just realized the scale of the challenge, and still we haven't really sort of established it. I think what is really good to share is my work involves what I can maybe say 4 key areas. One is to look internally within the council in terms of how do we support citizens of Bristol, people that are living in Bristol. How do we ensure that things are coordinated? That's number one. Number two, locally, it's also local engagement. How do we, using, the mayor's public role as a public figure, how do we speak? How do we share some of these stories, the pain of suffering that we have heard from the stories that Caroline was reading to us? How do we also not only share, how do we use these stories to make change internally within the council? Then how do we also take these voices at a national level as well as international level? So that's my role regarding what I do on a day-to-day basis. But more specifically, in terms of the practical steps that we have taken through our One City approach, was to have very 2 distinctive groups of people during the every one in, where we have one specific group looking at EU nationals. So these are more or less sort of case stud groups. With casework groups. One was looking for people seeking sanctuary, which end up as been said by Caroline. So those 2 groups we managed to sort of bring them. So our role was really to coordinate those groups that they have every weekly meetings to understand people's situation. And I'm really happy, particularly for refugees, that when everyone in ended in Bristol, we also had our own sort of form of everyone in, and continued. As far as I'm aware, there's no any asylum seeker, failed asylum seeker who didn't have accommodation that were in the hotel, which I think is really good. Maybe before, if we had not probably worked collectively with the sector as well as the council, probably be talking of a different story. But I'm not trying to suggest that there are no people out there who don't have support. They are there, but I think what it demonstrates is there some, if we collectively work together, irrespective of some of the policies nationally, but we have our concerted effort locally, we can achieve at a local level. It was, enabled because of, people working through, Bristol Refugee Rights. Without mentioning, there were fantastic people that really, on a weekly basis, look at specific individual. Our housing options team really navigating, areas. How do we really, supporting people? And that piece of work of some of the lessons learned, I'm sure our colleagues here, Anna or Freya, can, share some of the lessons learned during everyone in. So from that work, it also, helped us to say, as a city, there is a challenge, and how do we learn from other cities? So part of my role is also to engage with other local authorities, with my other colleague, David, who is not here today, to look at sort of learning from what is happening in other cities across the country, Liverpool, Coventry, so that some of the things we can, share here in Bristol. And part of it, we just realized that there is, in as much as fantastic work is happening in other places, I think there's lack of a really understanding of that voice of people and wanting to hear people's experiences. That's why we have this project with Bristol Refugee Rights, which Caroline has been, interviewing people through the Refugees, Asylum Seekers and Migration Project, RAMP project, where we just really wanting to understand a Bristol, the Bristol angle, the Bristol situation. So having this cohort of people would enable us to say locally, what sort of the rig room that we can use as a local authority to support people. Then if not, what can we do through the core cities? How do we take it to a second level, to a national level, and say, this is our experience in Bristol. I'm sure it's the same experience in Liverpool. That's the same, principle across sort of some of the areas. How do we amplify our voices and maybe, try to address things nationally? So we are in that sort of process, and I'm excited with some of the stories we are hearing from Caroline that will help to shape those discussions, that also help to shape internally, also help us to change our refugee and asylum seeker strategy, which looks into how we respond to these issues across the city, and having very specific action points on how do we support people with no recourse to public funds. Perhaps some of the things might be, is it maybe more resources to ensure that the work that Bristol Refugee Rights are doing, or does it maybe more training in terms of understanding? Because I think there's also quite a lot of confusion. People not actually understand what no recourse to public funds mean. And people have been waiting for a very, very, very long time. And some of the people have actually been contributing to the vibrance of the city, but now because of what's happening with COVID, they are now, not eligible to work. So it's really critical that we address these issues locally. So that's some of the, the work that I'm doing, and I'm excited that the mayor is very supportive. Is very supportive of the work. And also, sharing some of the stories. In instance, Dana's story. Thank again to Caroline. We also had the opportunity to share it. Media is very powerful. We need platforms to share these stories. And during Refugee Week, it was one of our highlight stories on the mayor's blog, featuring no recourse to public funds. And again, sharing Dana's powerful story. But we cannot continue sharing these stories without actually changing people's lives. It's a marathon race. It's a challenge, but we also need to take it up. Yes, the local authority can do, but what about other big players in the city? What about our private sector? What about our businesses? So it's also taking these stories to our key players across the city as well. then, as I said, it also, you know, in international, when we talk about, you know, we know we are very involved in the Mayor's Migration Council. These are some of the things that we share as a city, that because of the national legislation, cities are not on the forefront of debates when it comes to, you know, change of migration issues. So it's also, these are some of the, you know, ammunition that probably the mayor can also use when we are having dialogues with other international players. You know, I'm excited that in yesterday there was actually a meeting with, you know, C40 and other players looking at the role of cities. So yes, it might not immediately change, but I think these discussions needs to also be had, you know, at, you know, bigger, you know, at a higher levels, international levels, you know, UN, you know, etc., and you know, but the mayor can only do that with empirical evidence from what is actually happening on the local level. So it's really important that we don't miss out on that. And I'm also, you know, excited that he also had even make a commitment to say, when we are having discussions around COP26 on migration and climate issues, let's ensure that the voice of people with lived experience, those people with expert by experience, is, you know, is top on the agenda. So I think these are some of the things that are, you know, my work is also involved to make sure that we promote the work. I think like what a lot of people said, like what Malcolm X said, at times it's not about the lack of numbers, it's about how we organize ourselves. So it's really, you know, important that collaboratively we come together. That's why it is really important that while we are celebrating to, you know, I'm here celebrating, you know, Bristol being a city of sanctuary, but it's a moment also to reflect our journey, to say where we are. Maybe you know, what is, you know, what can we do better? So it's really important that we are having these discussions. Maybe 5 years down the line, will Dana be the same? Will more be the same? How do we ensure that, you know, we as a city, we demonstrate hospitality in practice, not only in saying? So it's just really, you know, reinforcing that message that we need to come together for a unit of purpose to make sure that those people that are here, they need to be supported, but not only supported, but I think it's creating an opportunity for them to contribute, because they have, you know, they can contribute. They've been working. You know, these are people that have vast skills and talents. So how do we ensure that people are supported? So in a nutshell, that's really our work. But the greater vision is to create what we call a Bristol model for supporting people with no recourse to public funds, where we would not be talking about individuals. The awareness needs to be there that, you know, everybody is, you know, be it in schools, people are aware. When people can, you know, go for training, people go for, you know, for jobs, people are aware of how to help people, rather than waiting at the last minute where we talk about, you know, everyone in where there's no resources anyway. You know, the government, you know, ended without actually, you know, providing enough, you know, resources, and we are seeing it from those, you know, stories. So I'm really excited that this partnership work with project with Bristol Refugee Right would give us some more indication and a canvas of where we are going as a city. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what I'm doing. And thank you for organizing for today. And thank you for, you know, in absentia, although they are not here, people that are really willing to share their stories with Caroline. It's not easy. It's very painful to share your journey. It's very, you know, degrading to, you know, to share your life, you know, experience. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of, you know, courage to share stories. And it's really, you know, wonderful that, you know, Mo and Dana and many more are continuing to share, you know, their stories, as well as to make them, you know, publicly known. But so as Bristol, I would say, let's harness this opportunity and support people with dignity and respect. Thank you.
That was incredible. Thank you, Forward. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with everything you both said. So our first question, you did mention it slightly, Forward, was some people don't exactly understand what NRPF is. So I wondered whether maybe we could start with just a definition of exactly what it means to be no recourse to public funds. I don't know, Forward, you want to take that?
Yeah, sort of put it simply is when somebody is subject to no recourse to public funds, there is a condition on their on their status that either they have eligible to work, but they don't have access to benefits. That's so whether you have that right to work, then some if you are someone who is going through the asylum process, you are not eligible to work and you are not eligible to public benefit support. There's things like housing, child support, all those sort of where people who have the right to stay would benefit. So which means they are not eligible to provide themselves. Let's say in the case of EEA nationals who have been working, and because it's ended because of COVID, they are not eligible to apply for housing benefit. They are not eligible to get those support, which means in as much as the 20 years they've been working, it's just really they're left in limbo.
But I just add, I think the way that Forward and David and I have sometimes talked about it is not having a safety net. So like Forward said, there's many people in the UK who are subject to no recourse to public funds who will never need recourse to public funds because they're working or studying and they're self-sufficient. But what it does mean is if something happens in an emergency, in COVID, if they get sick, if, all the things that can happen to people in life, there's no safety net for them. There's nothing to catch them in our society. They're just going to fall through. So they will become homeless, or they'll, if their rent will be in arrears, or they won't be able to pay their mortgage, all those things that if you're a British citizen or have a visa where you can access public funds that could catch you in that situation are not there for those people. So you're just much more vulnerable to change.
Yeah, and I think what is also important to highlight as well is, someone who, or a person who has that condition, if they end up applying for public funds, they would be, accused of being, have committed a crime, and they might even be having their, immigration status penalized. So it's not, very easy. It's not that very easy to say, oh, they can just go into a job center. No, they will actually be penalized for claiming benefits.
Thank you, guys. That makes it a lot clearer about what the actual issues people are facing. So Caroline, you mentioned a bit that obviously it's no safety net and it makes people very vulnerable, which can obviously be super stressful, regardless of your situation, if you have a job or you're a university or whatever. And you also mentioned a few issues that people face in your stories. What would you say is the biggest impact on an individual's mental health that is living with no recourse public funds?
Yeah, I mean, like obviously the clear one that comes through is destitution, so homelessness and having no access to any money, relying entirely on charities or on friends and community members, which again makes people ripe for exploitation. So there's lots of people working cash in hand for ludicrous amounts of money, doing crazy hours, exploitative work that comes. It's what's the biggest impact for people? So I mean, that's really hard for me to answer. From those stories, the themes there that came out was that, I'm going to talk about a model. What's that triangle model of need? Maslow's, is
Maslow.
Yeah, the first level being that you need shelter and some food, and actually if you can't meet that, you're really going to struggle to ever be a human in any other way. Because there's such a wide range of people in this situation, there's different impacts and different vulnerabilities for different people. So, for example, I mentioned spousal visas as being one of the major routes that people have a visa which is subject to no recourse to public funds. There's huge problems there around domestic violence and abuse, because if your access to money is completely tied through this person because your visa doesn't give you any independent safety net, that there's huge barriers there. So and I think for some people who've been no recourse to public funds, they might never actually notice it because they're lucky enough that they never lose their job and they're comfortable in the UK. but also, yeah, like there's people who've been working 10 years in Bristol as a carer, let's say, and then suddenly their child is sick and they can't work as a carer anymore, and they've got nowhere to go. You know, there's hundreds of thousands of children in this situation as well, in the UK, and many here in Bristol, because children inherit the status of their parents. So if the parent is no recourse to public funds, the child is too. So yeah, it's a devastating policy for millions, more than 1 million people in the UK living, and it's only going to increase because new laws are being put in that will mean more and more people are no recourse to public funds. It's growing rather than shrinking in terms of national policy.
Thank you, Caroline. Yeah, we're going to discuss that a bit later, actually, about the bills and policies that will increase that. Forward, did you want to add anything to that question?
Yeah, I think Caroline raised an interesting point actually about families, because families are also impacted heavily. There are families involved. So you can imagine just suddenly, you don't have, are not able, you've been, maybe a taxi driver, you've been working the whole of your life, then suddenly you are not able to fend for your family. It's just really humiliating, and you can't support them. You can't do anything, especially with the impact of, COVID, where we all have been affected in some way or other. So it's worse to people in those situations. So I can imagine sort of the impact of, mentally, and also it's coupled with the intolerable waiting. You don't know what's going to happen. Yes, it's really very difficult for people, and it doesn't benefit anyone at all. And what we have done in most of the local for families is, because of they have children, so they will be supported under Section 17. But what it means is they are getting sort of support somehow. It's something that is not budgeted for. So local authorities are going just ahead to support people because of Section 17, which means somehow there's going to be lack of budget in other areas, because this is not budget, but you have you are sort of mandated to support people because they are families. So really, you would have expected that the government to be aware, because there's a statutory instrument that Section 17 children under Section 17 children in need, they need to be supported. So they were supposed to help local authorities to support family, but it's not. And yeah, so it's quite a challenge on that front for families in schools and stuff. Yeah.
Thank you, Forward. Yeah, I think it's just a all-round terrible impact, isn't it? So you spoke a bit, Forward, about like a Bristol model, about how you would like to support people within Bristol, whether that be like families or individuals. What power do local authorities actually have when it comes to supporting people with no recourse to funds? And did you want to say any more about the Bristol model?
We are still in the infancy. I think that what will help us to come up with the model is this piece of research that we are currently undertaking, and also learning good practice from other cities, as well as, more importantly, learning from people who have experienced it with the interviews that Caroline is. It is from that information, that report, when it's tabled, then we have further discussions with the sector, everybody involved, and say, how do we respond? But really, the overall vision for us is we are underpinned by, say, we are a city of sanctuary. We need to support people irrespective of their condition, irrespective of their status. We people need just be feel welcome. So we really need to bring other players on board. So we are still exploring different kind of sort of principles. So we're really hinging on those sort of principles. And after that, we maybe find whether it's going to work or not. Then secondly, it's national level. We got to work with others to change national legislation where possible. It's not going to be easy, but we need to continue to make our contributions. We need to also continue to share our practice here and other places as well. It's become a national issue. It's not only Bristol alone. What difference is the number of people that we have in each city? What was the second part of your question?
So I was just asking about what power local authorities have, and if you wanted to say a bit more about what you want Bristol to do.
Yeah, in terms of power becomes on Section 17. That gives, the Section 17 is what gives the local authority power to support people. Then it also depends on people who have sort of, need clinical support. So you can use adult services, adult services under Adult Act to support them. Then maybe some, because of the, intolerable waiting where people would have, mental health issues. But what it does is you don't have resources to, provide that support. The work that Caroline and us is, if it not been maybe, private, or charities supporting, we will not be, be able to do that work. So it really needs more also, resources to either support organizations like BRR or the council itself, where you have people being trained to be able to identify people who are subject to no recourse to public funds. So it's more also, different lenses, different way, supporting, work that needs to be done in, internally as well as externally. So you need to also educate, train staff to understand these whole issues. Where are the resources coming from? So it's about also raising really awareness. And what we are doing internally is actually educating staff. We also have, moments where we ask people from refugee rights to deliver training to social workers within the council. So those are some of the stuff that we're doing internal, but I think more work needs to be done.
I'm not sure if I'm right in this, so forward if I'm wrong, please cut in. But I think that local authorities have the power to support people who are NRPF in whatever way they can. Like, there's no legal saying no, you can't help them with accommodation. What there isn't is any budget or any money. So because they can't access housing benefit, they, that's how the local authority supports people. That's how they cover the costs of that. Am I right saying that forward?
No, no. If you are subject to no recourse to public funds, because local authority are public bodies, so automatically your service is only to people who qualify. That's where, if it was going to be very simple, I think that's where it locks local authorities. That's where they are locked, because they are classified. Local authorities provide public service. So which means a person who is subject to no recourse to public funds automatically won't qualify for council services unless you use the RUG room. That's, we are sort of, because of the, the clinical, support that people need. You have to make those assessments to justify why they can be supported. So that's the challenge. That, and for that's the biggest challenge. It's because of the national legislation.
Thank you for clarifying that, Forward. I thought the same, Caroline. So thank you for clarifying, Forward. So we are going to move on a bit more to look at the kind of national policies you mentioned, Forward. Earlier, Caroline, you spoke a bit about how the new policies, specifically the Nationality and Borders Bill, which is had its second reading in Parliament this week, is, if passed, will increase the number of people that have NRPF. So did you want to talk a bit more about the impact of the bill, especially on people with this condition?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on the bill, so I will try my best. But I think, for example, Mo's the perfect example of the story that we told earlier. As I understand it, what the bill is going to do is split people with refugee status into A-class refugees and B-class refugees. And B-class refugees, even once they're recognised as a refugee here in the UK, they'll have a visa, but that visa will be subject to no recourse to public funds. So at the moment, once you get refugee status, you basically have very similar rights to a British person. You can't vote, but other than that, you can access almost anything that a British citizen can access. But this bill will change that, and these B-class refugees, even though we're recognising that they do need protection, will be no recourse to public funds. And I think that Mo, whose story I told at the beginning, would be quite likely to fall into that category of B-class refugee, because the bill is saying that people who've sort of travelled here not through a clear refugee pathway, like they haven't flown from a refugee camp, will probably be classified as a B-class refugee. So the fact that he was here for 7 years came on a student visa, I think it's quite likely that even once he got status, in the future, he would still be no recourse to public funds. So his refugee status wouldn't change his situation. He'd be still at risk of homelessness and relying on charities and destitute. Whereas now, in our current climate, that it has changed for him now, and he's able to move forward. So that's going to have if it passes in the full format, and all of these things are a bit unclear about exactly who's going to be an A and a B, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of legal challenges around that. But there will be this group of people who've been recognised as refugees, genuine refugees who need sanctuary and protection, but who will continue to be no recourse to public funds. Again, for some people, that they'll be fine because they'll get a job, but for others who need that safety net, it's not going to be there for them. So people like Mo, who finally found a way out, that exit path is being cut if this bill passes.
That's terrible. Ford, did you want to add anything?
I think my worry really for the bill is it's silent on no recourse to public funds. It's not mentioned anything at all. We are talking about it's something that is happening here, across all cities, including, the headquarters London. And the new immigration plan is nothing to see how does it going to address it. So that's, for me, it's worrying. I would have expected, because it's a new immigration plan that is coming. Already we have an immigration challenge. I would have expected it to give solution to an already existing problem. So for me, that's a great, that's even more worrying before we even talk about whether they come here or not. So it's not addressing it. It means it's ignoring this community that we're talking about already. So to them, they don't exist. So it's really quite worrying. And I just add on to what agree to what Caroline is saying, that it's bringing refugees, classifying refugees into the good and bad, which is not helpful at all. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. That's helped clarify that a lot. So obviously the bill is going to, if passed, would increase a lot of people having an RPF. What would you guys say as members of the Bristol community, what people and individuals in the community can do to help those that are faced with NRPF and to change the policy that leads to that, and maybe anything they can do against the bill? I don't know if either of you are welcome to take that one.
Yeah, I think what Bristolians can do, I'll give them quite one not challenge, it's just encouragement, because it's continuing with your hospitality. The revolution of generosity that we have seen in the launch of City of Sanctuary, we have seen in COVID, if it can continue to be extended and really show that we are Bristol, we can do it without necessarily going beyond our boundaries. I think we have the resources, we have people with a good heart. Let's translate our words of compassion into action, and support people that needs that head on top of their roof, people who need a job, who need sort of training, people that it can be provided with English language, etc., etc. So those things that we can they can be done locally. Then in terms of nationally, you have to engage with your your MPs and express that it's really hindering what we what you stand for, because it's about what you stand for. If you stand for justice and peace, you cannot remain silent on things that matter to you. So Bristolians, you have to speak out. We have heard the crying voice of more. We have heard the crying voice with pain of Dana, and they need also other their voices need to be amplified, and it's only Bristolians who can also help to take a step further. It might look as if, yes, things are might not move, but remember, if you shift a little bit of miles or a couple of centimeters, it's better than remaining silent and not move. So let's engage with those in the corridors of power. Let's continue to engage with with the mayor. Let's engage with our MPs, and yeah, I think that's would be what I can say, really.
Incredible, thank you, Ford. Yeah, I completely echo that, but couldn't have said it nearly as well. Caroline, did you have anything to add?
One thing really, but yeah, I think Ford's completely right. There's sort of like two fronts. There's like the Bristol front, which is like supporting local organisations that are doing something about it. You know, we've mentioned like BHN, they're always looking for hosts, they're always looking for funding. They want to call that, but Bristol Refugee Rights, you know, there's lots of organisations, City of Sanctuary, you know, get involved, support that locally, support that hospitality and that response locally. And then nationally, exactly as Ford said. The only other thing I would say is as well as having conversations with people in power, have conversations with just people, because there's so many misconceptions, there's so many misfacts floating around about asylum seekers, NRPF, all of these things. And, you know, this new bill, the government believe this bill reflects public opinion on what people want. You know, that there's an anti-immigration, there's an anti-asylum seeker public opinion, right? So part how we challenge that is to shift public opinion. And that might be having some difficult conversations with your uncle or whoever it is that's got quite a different opinion, but, you know, being brave to challenge sometimes and to, you know, share a story with someone who might have had some of those misfacts, which it's so easy to get, you know, it's so easy, it's rife in the media and in the Home Office itself, like the statements are full of misfacts and misinformation. So yeah, be brave to have those conversations, to be a champion, I think.
Amazing, thank you so much, Caroline. Awesome. Well, I think if there aren't any questions from the audience, we'll wrap it up. This resource will be on the website, so if you do want to share it with anyone and continue the conversation like Ford and Caroline have both recommended, I would really encourage everyone to do that that's watching this. Thank you, Ford and Caroline, so much for joining us. You were both incredible to listen to. So I think we'll wrap it up there.
Thanks, Freya and Anna.
No worries. Thanks, guys. I think, Anna, if you stop the recording now.